The US military needs to be extremely careful because we are losing one of our most vital skills that took nearly 20 years to form. I'm talking about route clearance. Now stick with me for this video because we are going to be talking about one of the most boring jobs in the world and one of the most dangerous jobs in the world within the US military. And not only that, talking about route clearance is actually a little taboo because not a lot of people outside of the military really know what route clearance is all about, and military members who serve hardly know what route clearance is all about. But first, here's my disclaimer. Due to the fact that YouTube has some guidelines and policies, I can't use certain keywords that I want to say or use. I'm going to try and be as specific as possible, so please stick with me. And my name is T-Sply, let's start the video. Now, one thing you need to realize is that clearing a route is not necessarily route clearance, and this can get a little confusing. So every military ever has at one point had to clear a route for troops to go down the route and make sure everything was safe. And there have always been many ways of doing this. You could either walk down the road and say all is clear, you could fly a drone over a road and say everything looks good. Again, clearing a route, that is a thing, but that is not route clearance. Because to some soldiers, when you hear the words route clearance, and by some soldiers I mean the combat engineer, route clearance is quite literally an art form. And this art form almost turned into a cat and mouse game against the enemies of the United States. So we need to bring it back to 2003 Iraq War. One thing we need to understand is that when troops went into Iraq, it was big military versus big military, Iraqi military versus US military. So you need to understand this concept of like booby traps in the road or something hanging from a tree that could take out a truck. This was not necessarily the biggest threat to the US military. One thing that could have been a threat was like anti-tank mines, anti-personnel mines, things like that. Very standard big military type things. Now, when the Iraqi military completely crumbled, things changed a lot. Soldiers started to face random objects in the middle of the road that were not safe, as in they would quite literally pop in your face, if you know what I mean. I'm talking things like garbage bags, things like Pepsi cans in the middle of the road. Things were starting to become very unsafe to soldiers during the Iraq War, and it was happening very fast. So now combat engineers, instead of clearing routes, they start to develop something called route clearance. And in the early days of route clearance during the Iraq War, no one really knew what they were doing other than pointing out the fact that the pile of garbage on the side of the road, I think that's a bad thing over there. And I'm not minimizing the intelligence of a soldier. Put yourself in the shoes of the soldiers back in 2004 who've never encountered a soda can just pop and try to take out your left tire in your Humvee. Now, in the early days of route clearance was essentially a method to fully clear an entire route in a very professional and methodical manner. What I mean by that is you had what were called SOPs, standard operating procedures, where soldiers will follow certain ways to either take out a trap in the road and to clear an entire route. Because you have to understand, everything within the US military is standardized. So you can't just have one soldier who knows how to do everything. Everyone within the route clearance package needs to know what they're doing. So combat engineers quite literally were writing the rule books in how they would clear these routes. And route clearance started to develop and develop, but then we have a massive hurdle. One of the largest threats throughout the whole Iraq War was the EFP. And the EFP was essentially this inverted cone of metal. And as the metal shot out of the cone, it would invert and turn molten hot and pretty much penetrate almost any piece of armor. Now, what the issue was is that the troops back during the Iraq War didn't necessarily have the strongest pieces of equipment out there. Like, Humvees were hardly protected as they were, and these EFPs were just slicing through Humvees like hot butter. And to make things even more complex for the route clearance soldiers, EFPs and these trigger systems were able to detect any infrared picture. Which means when your truck was driving down the road, since your engine is hot, the EFP will quite literally never miss your Humvee because it senses that hot engine. But remember, I told you route clearance was the biggest cat and mouse game ever, because now we have something called the Rhino. The Rhino was essentially this long metal pole with a hot box on the end of it, and you already know where this is going. Instead of the EFP targeting the heat signature of your engine, it targeted the heat signature of your hot box. So, confirmed, unconfirmed, and I was a combat engineer, and this story is sort of like within the realm of combat engineer. The Rhino was essentially invented out of necessity. Like, there were troops out there who pretty much were starting fires inside of ammo cans because they realized these EFPs were targeting anything hot. So if we light an ammo can on fire, or the fire within the ammo can, the EFP will attack that. But again, the biggest cat and mouse game ever. The guys who made the EFPs and the trigger systems were able to make some very small adjustments and timing adjustments to where the EFP could avoid the hot box and hit the engine. But we have a reverse Uno card, because the Rhino system was also able to adjust its pole and make it a little longer so that the EFP gets redirected and hits the hotbox again. Now, as things progress, the vehicles in route clearance packages get better. We sort of get away from the Humvee. Now, around 2007, 2008-ish, we start to really develop what's called our route clearance package. And essentially what you have within your route clearance package, it's the organization of vehicles that are specifically made to clear a route. You have vehicles who are specifically designed to investigate a mine or a trap and to take it out. You have vehicles specifically designed to provide security for everyone. And you have vehicles that'll pick anybody up unless they fall into a ditch or unless they get blown up. And I will get to these specific vehicles in a second, but what you need to understand is this is always referred as the route clearance package. So towards the end of the Iraq War, the route clearance package was very minimum of what it was. And what I mean by that is, at the time, the route clearance package, we had the perfect vehicles for the job, but the technology within the route clearance package was still a little new. Now, these are your main route clearance package vehicles. Every route clearance package vehicle essentially needs to have a Husky.
This route clearing system consists of 2 Husky vehicles and a set of mine detonation trailers, as well as a trailer set of spare parts known as a Red Pack. In the event of a detonation, the Husky is designed to break apart in a predictable fashion and can be repaired in the field, usually within 2 hours. An experienced operator often identifies the location of explosive devices and merely uses the sensors to confirm or refute its presence.
You need to have a Buffalo. You need to have some sort of security elements or gun trucks. And then you need to have some sort of wrecker system, again, to pull you out of the ditch, or a mechanic out there to repair your vehicles in case you're down and out of the fight.
The mission of a route clearance team demands a lot of the soldiers who are out on the roads of Afghanistan looking for improvised explosive devices.
You really can't have a set schedule with route clearance. They come in and out, so it's all hours. I've done a 32-hour day before just to get a truck done and ready to go out.
So towards the end of the Iraq War, the route clearance vehicles were not really encountering the biggest mines or the most complex mines out there. They were dealing mostly with EFPs, they were dealing with cars trying to crash into them, and you know what else they were trying to do? But as we change from out of the Iraq War into the Afghanistan War, route clearance really starts to change. We get away from the EFP type mine, which is great, but we start to run into mines that'll lift the Buffalo up out of the air and flip it over. We run into these complex ambushes that are meant to take out the third truck behind you, the first truck in front of you 200 feet down the road, and then you get ambushed. And this is where route clearance gets away from just clearing mines from the road. Now we have to really work on our ambush tactics and our security tactics. And not only that, with the very advanced route clearance packages, we even have drones who are monitoring the road, and they can see little elements move within the dirt, report that to your security shops, report that to your route clearance elements, and now they know exactly where to go in the road to find IEDs or traps within the road. And this is only in 2012. Remember, we've come a long way from the Iraq War 2003-2004 to 2012 route clearance. Something else that really starts to change in route clearance packages is the actual armor of the vehicles. We have what are called RPG nets or RPG cages. So in case a vehicle gets struck with an RPG, it'll dissipate within the cage. And you start to see these route clearance packages that look super decked out. They almost look like alien spacecrafts. And the reason for this is because in almost every single area of Afghanistan, you might face a different mine that is particular within the area. So for example, one of the most common areas that has the biggest traps or IEDs is Kandahar. And in Kandahar, it was just known that the IED makers were just trying to make the biggest IEDs ever to flip your vehicle over and then hopefully initiate an ambush. But then when you get to eastern Afghanistan, that's when you start to see these really complex ambushes where route clearance has to go either through the fight, they can't back up because of how narrow the passageways were in eastern Afghanistan. So I want to show you some video clips of what route clearance would look like in different terrains so you could sort of pretend to be like you're there and you can realize, wow, things look a little difficult. It's not like we're just driving down the road and, hey, I see something, let's clear it. It's not like that.
Patrol and operates a vehicle specifically designed to scan for roadside bombs. Staff Sergeant Sean Torgerson says RCP is crucial for ensuring the safety of convoys. The convoy spent 3 days traveling nearly 90 kilometers through a dry riverbed that at times was no wider than a king-size bed.
Now, what you need to realize is that throughout all of these years of route clearance, you start developing tactics that pretty much get passed on like a game of telephone from soldier to soldier to soldier. You hear about the recent deployment before you where when soldiers were operating in a certain area, hey, just watch out because on the left side of a hill, sometimes they use cell phones to blow up IEDs in our area. Or if soldiers lose in the unfortunate event of an ambush, the US military can gather that data and they can realize what changes to make or to not make. So here's what the concern is. There's no need for route clearance anymore because there is no more war in Afghanistan or Iraq. And something else that's happening internally within the military, and this happens whenever a conflict is over, route clearance units start to dissipate. I even have friends who were at one time last year in route clearance units and the units just fell apart. They got sent to other units. And this is a skill we are quite literally losing within the US military. Now, theoretically, if a conflict happened tomorrow, we still have enough soldiers today who know how to do route clearance at a very high level. And look, I am not one to advocate for a conflict so we can get our skills back, but nonetheless, if nothing happens within 5 or 10 years, we really truly will lose a lot of the skills that we learned in Afghanistan. Because things are not as simple as just throw some soldiers in the vehicles and they'll know exactly what to do. A lot of the soldiers who were in route clearance companies and a part of route clearance packages, that was their expertise. Driving 3 miles an hour for 12 hours and just waiting to get taken out, that takes a very special person and a very crazy person. And that's not just a skill you can teach somebody or tell somebody about. The only way to truly do route clearance is if you do it, or at least have people around you where you feel confident enough to do your job. Now, I want to throw this out there, confirmed, unconfirmed, combat engineers within the US military are training Ukrainians on some route clearance tactics. But again, we run into a situation of unless you've done it or unless you have people within your route clearance package who could tell you exactly what to do, I don't know if the Ukrainians will necessarily benefit too much from our training when it comes to route clearance. Now, route clearance is not necessarily like going away forever. Combat engineers always need to know every task ever. Whether it's clearing a route or doing route clearance, you always need to know that skill. But again, when you don't have actual route clearance operations or using RCP packages, we're losing that skill. So yeah, that's the gist of the video. I hope you enjoyed it and I hope you learned something. Please leave your comments and opinions down below and let me know if you learned something. Route clearance is not really talked about too much because it's not like the coolest job ever, but it's probably one of the most important jobs ever because you gotta clear a route. And as a former combat engineer in the 101st Airborne, I always loved the fact how soldiers were quite literally writing their own rule books and writing their own standard operating procedures in how you do route clearance. And if it wasn't for the early combat engineers to have joined before me, I wouldn't have had the skills I had when I was in the 101st Airborne, and so on. So yeah, that's the video. My name is T-Sply, and we'll see you later.